This video is going to show you how to set up your Raspberry Pi without using any peripheral devices like a keyboard and mouse. This is typically called a headless setup. So in this video, we're not going to need a keyboard and mouse to directly connect to our device. We're just going to power on our device, and then we're going to connect to it remotely over SSH or PuTTY or Remote Desktop. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is download Raspberry Pi Imager from the Raspberry Pi website. And this software lets us flash the operating system to our micro SD storage card. Okay, so we need to get the Raspberry Pi operating system onto our SD card. So the software that we want to use is called Raspberry Pi Imager, and we're going to get that from raspberrypi.org. So let's take a look over there, and then we're going to click on software. Basically what you're going to see here is, if we go to all download options, so these are the actual Raspberry Pi operating systems. And we're going to want that, but we also need a way to get the OS onto the SD card. We need a flasher. And so we're going to use Raspberry Pi Imager, and this is going to bundle everything together. So let's go ahead and download Raspberry Pi Imager for our system. I'm going to download for Mac OS. Okay, so now we should have Raspberry Pi Imager. Looks like we do. I'm going to load it up. If you like this video, go ahead and click that like button so we can get it out to a wider audience. Thank you. Okay, so this is going to let us flash the operating system to our SD card. Okay, and since we're looking to flash our SD card, we're going to go ahead and pull it out of our Raspberry Pi slot here. And just so you know, I'm using a SanDisk 32 gigabyte micro SD card. So we do need to connect it to our computer so that we can get the Raspberry Pi operating system on this card. So you can use one of these guys, which is a SD card to USB converter, or you can use a micro SD to SD converter. And since my Mac has a native SD card reader, I'm just going to go ahead and use this. So I'm going to throw it in there, and then I'm going to insert it into my computer here. Quick note here, if your micro SD card is over 32 gigabytes, then you may need to format it to the FAT32 file system type. And that's pretty easy to do. Both Microsoft and Mac have native formatting solutions that you can use to do that. But if your SD card is smaller than that, you shouldn't need to worry about that. Now that we have our SD connected to our computer, let's just double check that it is showing up. Okay, so now that the SD card is connected to my computer, I'm just going to look in a Finder window to see what drives I have currently attached. And it looks like it is showing up as boot, which looks fine to me. So let's go ahead and flash the Raspberry Pi operating system to that drive. Okay, and since we want our Raspberry Pi to run headless, we want it to immediately connect to our Wi-Fi network. We also want SSH to be enabled on the initial boot up. So there's a special menu option. If you press Control-Shift-X with Raspberry Pi Imager in focus, it will bring up a menu where we can make some of those initial configurations. So we can enable SSH. It's going to ask us to change the default password. That's just a security precaution. And then we're also going to provide our Wi-Fi network name and password. Make sure that you're connecting to a 2.4 gigahertz network because many of the devices can't connect to 5G. Some of them need to be updated before they can do that. And then we'll go ahead and click Save. So we're going to select the operating system we want. I'm going to do the out-of-the-box Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit. And then we're going to select our storage. Make sure you're selecting the right storage here because if you select the wrong drive, you're going to overwrite everything. So this is my 1 terabyte Samsung. Do not want to select that. This is my 32 gigabyte micro SD, and that's the target drive. So we're going to go ahead and click Write. Okay, looks like we're all set. That probably took about 4 minutes. So we're going to come back over to Finder here. Okay, it looks like it ejected the drive proactively for us. Okay, so now we can take out our micro SD card and place it into our Raspberry Pi, like so. All right, and then we're just gonna power it on without connecting it to any peripheral devices. Okay, so I just plugged in the USB-C power cable, and let's see here, which one is it? It's this guy at the end. And then I'm going to toggle the switch. All right, and we can see that light turning on. Should be booting up momentarily. So now we need to validate that our Raspberry Pi is in fact connected to our local network. So I actually just logged into my router's homepage here, the admin portal, and most routers offer this capability where they will list connected devices, just so you can kind of audit that the devices that are connected to your network are the expected devices. Okay, and then when I list the connected devices, I see Raspberry Pi here. That is the default host name. You can change that if you need. I also see the IP address. So this is what I would expect, and it's connected to my 2.4G network because I have a dual band router. And as I mentioned, it will not connect to 5G, so make sure you keep that in mind. So another way to validate that it's on the network, if you can't find your router login page, is to pull open a terminal. Okay, so I'm just gonna open a terminal here, expand this guy. We should be able to ping the host name. So I'm gonna do ping Raspberry Pi, and you can see it is responding to ping traffic, ICMP traffic. So I'm gonna do Control C to terminate that. Quick caveat, if you're on a Windows machine, a Windows 10 machine, you're not gonna have a Linux terminal to do like the SSH and the ping and that sort of thing. So what you're gonna wanna do is download the Linux subsystem. If you're on a Windows computer, you wanna download the Linux subsystem, and once you do that and have it enabled, I think you can use like the Windows Store to download Ubuntu or one of the Linux operating systems. It's actually a really great feature of Windows 10, which is you can run a Linux container. And that Linux container will give you a Linux terminal, which is similar to the Unix terminal that I'm running here on my Mac. And when you have that ready, you can do exactly what we're doing here with ping, SSH, and that sort of thing. Okay, so we're gonna show you a couple other ways to connect remotely to your Raspberry Pi. So first, we're gonna wanna connect over SSH. And because we dropped the SSH flag in the boot drive, we can go ahead and do that right now. So I'm just gonna do SSH. The default username on Raspberry Pi is Pi, and then we need to supply the host name. So we're gonna do Pi at Raspberry Pi. And then it's gonna ask us only on the first connection if we want to use the RSA fingerprint. We're just gonna select yes. Okay, so I have fingerprints from previous connections, and it's saying that there's a discrepancy here. I'm gonna just proceed through that. It's prompting me for a password. So out of the box, the password is raspberry. Okay, and now I'm connected. If I do ls just to list everything. So Raspberry Pi OS is a Debian Linux variant. So essentially it's just a Linux operating system. So things will look pretty standard. So the next thing we're gonna wanna do is update the packages on the operating system. So I should be able to do apt get update. Oh, okay, so it's saying I don't have proper permissions. So what we can do is we can elevate ourselves to root. So the way we do that is sudo su dash. Okay, so now I'm a root user and we want to update the operating system. So we're going to do apt get update. And now we're just updating that Debian operating system. And it's good to do this right away when we log in. Okay, and then we can run apt get upgrade as well. Okay, so apt get upgrade finished running. So now we know we have the latest and greatest on the operating system. And I'm going to just quickly, okay, the next thing we want to do is change some of the default settings. You know, if everyone knows our default username and our default password, then we're kind of exposed. People can connect to our device. I mean, they have to be on our network, but we still probably want to swap out the default usernames and passwords. So the way we can do that is by running raspi-config, and that will open up this utility here. So what we can do is we can come over to system options, and then we can do a host name, and we can change the host name. So I can do, so I'll do pi_refactored. That will be my new host name. And then let's see what else here. Right, so if we wanted to add a new network, we could do that here. I'm not going to do that. If we wanted to change our password, we could do that here. I guess I will do that. Okay, so I just changed my password. Now, if you wanted to modify your username, meaning change it from Pi to something else, you could do that, but you can't do it from this menu here. You have to do that from the command line, adding a new user the same way you would with any Linux operating system. Okay, and then unfortunately, not all of those settings will take effect immediately. The password change will, but the host name won't until we do a reboot. So I'm going to do sudo reboot. This is going to shut down the Pi and restart it. Obviously the connection drops as well. Okay, so now we can see the Raspberry Pi is connected again, and it's using the new host name. Oddly enough, the underscore looks like it was taken out. I'm not sure if that's right. Let's go ahead and ping. So I'm going to do ping Pi refactored. Yeah, nothing. So let's take the underscore out. Okay, so you can't do an underscore apparently. That's fine. So the host name is now Pi refactored. And now what we can do is SSH Pi at Pi refactored. And then we should be able to connect just fine. And this, I'm gonna use my new password. All right, and we're logged back in. Another thing you can do is, if you wanna save the connection, you can do shell, new remote connection, just select SSH, do plus, provide the host name, in this case it's Pi refactored, and then user, and then, yeah, that's it. So the command is SSH Pi at Pi refactored, and we can just test it out here, and that looks good. Okay, so now we have a saved connection. It's kind of like PuTTY. So if you're on Windows, you could download PuTTY and you can save the connection as well. And I just wanted to prove you can do that on Mac as well. So next, if you want a full GUI desktop experience with your Raspberry Pi, you can use Remote Desktop and connect using the VNC protocol. Okay, so to connect over VNC, we need to enable that on the Raspberry Pi. So we're gonna do raspi config. And then we're gonna do interface options. And then for VNC, would you like the VNC server to be enabled? Yes. So now when we try to connect through the VNC protocol to our Raspberry Pi device, the Raspberry Pi device has a server listening for inbound traffic. Okay, so to be able to view our Raspberry Pi's actual GUI and desktop, we're gonna have to use a VNC client. Okay, so I'm gonna download RealVNC and just make sure you're getting the viewer software. Looks like it works on all platforms, so should be able to use this for Windows as well. Okay, so I'm gonna put the address in here, which is using the IP address that we found. So this is a local terminal. If I do dig, the new host name is Pi refactored. Alright, so I believe this is going to be my IP address. Let's try this. Okay. And then we might have to adjust our local MAC settings so that we can actually control and screen share properly. Let's not give that one. All right, so I'm just giving VNC. Okay, and now you can see we're controlling our actual Raspberry Pi. So let's see here. We're gonna set the country to United States. Language is American English. This one, we want New York for me. Use English language, use US keyboard. Set the country code and language properly, because there's some weird quirk with Raspberry Pi where if you don't set it properly, I think Wi-Fi can be affected. Okay, so right here on the left we have the VNC Remote Desktop connection where I can actually interface with the GUI. On the right we have the SSH connection, and what I want to show you is how the two correlate. So like if I navigate to the desktop, and that's the directory being shown here, I can create a file, right? Touch test.txt, and you can see it shows up on the desktop. See, these are just two different ways to interface with the operating system. There's the GUI, and then there's the CLI, the command line utility. And then real quick, if you're on Windows, another option is to use Remote Desktop. It's a native application that should be able to connect to VNC servers. Okay, and then to wrap this all up, let's just do one quick little fun project, which is to host a website on our Raspberry Pi. So the easiest way to do this in my mind is to choose a server software. I like Nginx, so I'm gonna do apt get install Nginx. It's asking me to elevate to root, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then I'm gonna retype that command, and I'm gonna install Nginx. So this downloads the Nginx server software, and it also should stand up a website that we can visit when we hit the IP address of our Raspberry Pi. Okay, let's just validate that the website is serving up traffic on localhost, so we're just gonna do curl localhost. Okay, this is the out-of-the-box Nginx website. So in theory, let's open a new local terminal. Let's grab the IP address of our Raspberry Pi. So I'm gonna do, oops, I changed the host name to Pi Refactored. So this is my IP address. So from here, if I do curl on the IP address, I get my website. So this is making me think if I open a new incognito window, and go to this IP address, boom, we're hosting a website from our Raspberry Pi. And just to confirm that we are in fact hosting that website, I'm gonna go to the HTML directory. So I'm gonna install a text editor because I want to be able to edit text. I'm gonna use Vim, so apt-get install Vim, and I'm gonna use Vim, and I'm going to remove the h1 element and add a new h1 element. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and save that. Now when we go back to our website, boom. And I just wanted to make a quick plug for all the other really interesting projects that you can do with Raspberry Pi. You can buy add-ons and extensions and modules that can do all sorts of things, GPS and robotic arms and things like that. So there's a whole lot of things that you can do with Raspberry Pi, and I'd urge you to take a look at some of that. As always, if you're interested in learning about the latest and greatest around emerging tech, AI, IoT, Google Cloud Platform, go ahead and subscribe to this channel as I am releasing content around those topics on the regular. Anyways, thank you for listening.